The Atlantic horizon glowed with the soft hues of dawn, its waves lapping gently against the shores of Orlando, Florida, where Aqua World stood as a beacon of marine spectacle. It was the summer of 2016, and the marine park was a bustling hub of excitement, drawing thousands of visitors each day to marvel at its star attractions, the orcas. At the heart of this aquatic theater was Tori, a 22-year-old female killer whale whose presence commanded awe. Her sleek black and white body, stretching nearly 20 feet and weighing 6,000 pounds, moved through the water with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Her eyes, sharp and brimming with intelligence, held a depth that captivated audiences and trainers alike. But no one was more captivated than Tom Elliot, a 27-year-old senior trainer whose life had become inextricably linked with Tori's in a bond that felt like destiny. Tom's journey to Aqua World began in a small coastal town in Maine, where the Atlantic was both a playground and a mystery. As a child, he'd perch on jagged cliffs, his sandy hair tousled by the salty breeze, watching the ocean churn and imagining the lives of its hidden inhabitants. Whales, dolphins, and the elusive orcas fascinated him most, their freedom and power a stark contrast to his quiet, landlocked existence. He'd collect shells, sketch sea creatures in a tattered notebook, and dream of a life working with the ocean's giants. That dream took root when he enrolled in marine biology at college, but it was a summer internship at Aqua World in 2010 that changed everything. The first time he saw an orca, Tori as it happened, leaped from the water, her massive form twisting in the air before crashing back with a thunderous splash. Tom felt a surge of purpose. He knew he'd found his calling. Joining Aqua World full-time in 2011, Tom started at the bottom, scrubbing tanks and hauling buckets of fish. But his dedication and natural affinity for the animals set him apart. By 2016, at just 27, he was a senior trainer, respected for his patience, intuition, and an almost uncanny ability to read the moods of the orcas. Colleagues marveled at his calm demeanor, the way he'd hum softly to the animals or mimic their clicks and whistles as if speaking their language. Tori, in particular, seemed to respond to him in ways she didn't with others. Captured off the coast of Iceland in 1999 at the age of 5, she'd spent nearly 2 decades in captivity, her life a cycle of performances, training, and confinement in a tank that was a fraction of the ocean she'd once known. She was intelligent, curious, and at times unpredictable, a combination that made her both a star and a challenge. Tom saw her differently. To him, Tori wasn't just an animal or a performer, she was a partner, a friend. He'd spend hours by her pool after hours, long after the crowds had gone, tossing her fish or simply sitting on the platform, his legs dangling over the water as he talked to her. "You're a wild thing in here, aren't you?" he'd say, his voice low and warm. Tori would often respond with a gentle nudge of her snout or a playful splash, her eyes locked on his. "She gets me," he'd tell his colleagues, a grin spreading across his freckled face. "And I get her." Their performances were the stuff of legend at Aqua World. Tom and Tori's signature act was a breathtaking display of trust. Tom would ride on Tori's back as she surged through the water, her powerful tail propelling them into a leap that seemed to defy physics. They'd soar together, Tom's arms outstretched, Tori's body gleaming under the stadium lights, before crashing back into the water in a cascade of spray. Children pressed their faces against the glass, their eyes wide with wonder. Parents snapped photos, their phones barely capturing the magic of the moment. The applause would thunder through the arena, a testament to the bond between man and orca. But beneath the surface, Aqua World was not the idyllic paradise it appeared to be. The park was under growing scrutiny from animal rights groups who protested outside its gates with megaphones and signs decrying the captivity of orcas. They pointed to the small tanks, mere pools compared to the vast ocean, the unnatural diets of frozen fish, and the shortened lifespans of captive orcas who rarely lived past 30 when their wild counterparts could reach 80 or more. Tori, at 22, was already showing signs of wear. Her dorsal fin, once proud and upright, had begun to droop, a common ailment in captive males but rarer in females. Trainers whispered about her mood swings, Moments when she'd ignore cues, swim listlessly, or linger at the bottom of the tank, her eyes fixed on some unseen point. Tom brushed these off as quirks, insisting Tori was just having an off day, but others weren't so sure. In the trainer's lounge, a cramped room filled with the smell of coffee and chlorine, debates about the ethics of their work were a daily ritual. Some, like Tom, believed they were giving the orcas a good life, providing care and enrichment for animals that couldn't survive in the wild after years in captivity. Others saw the orcas as prisoners, their spirits crushed by concrete walls and choreographed routines. "We're asking them to be something they're not," one trainer, a veteran named Maria, said one evening, her voice heavy with guilt. Tom would shake his head, his optimism unwavering. "Tori's happy," he'd insist, pointing to her playful splashes or the way she'd nudge his hand for more fish. "She trusts me. That's what matters." But trust, as Tom would soon discover, was a fragile thread, easily frayed by forces beyond his control. The summer of 2016 was a pressure cooker at AquaWorld. The park was locked in a fierce competition with rival marine parks, each vying for bigger crowds and flashier shows. Management pushed the trainers to deliver more elaborate performances, new tricks that would keep visitors coming back. Tom, as Tori's lead trainer, bore the brunt of this pressure. He was working 12-hour days designing new routines, mentoring junior trainers, and ensuring Tori was ready for the spotlight. His wife, Emily, a marine veterinarian at the park, noticed the toll it was taking. Tom's usual easygoing charm was giving way to a quiet intensity, his blue eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she'd tell him, her voice soft with concern, as they sat in their small apartment near the park. Tom would just smile, brushing a lock of her dark hair from her face. "Tori and I have got this," he'd say, his confidence unshaken. AquaWorld was gearing up for its biggest event of the year, a 4th of July extravaganza set to draw record crowds. The show would feature a new stunt, one that had Tom both excited and nervous. He was to dive from a 20-foot platform, timing his jump perfectly so that Tori would leap from the water, allowing him to land on her back midair. It was a high-risk maneuver, one that required absolute precision and trust between trainer and orca. Tom spent weeks rehearsing with Tori, refining her timing, ensuring she understood the cues. He'd stand by the pool, whistle in hand, watching her glide through the water, her movements as fluid as ever. "We're ready," he told Emily one night, his voice tinged with pride. But in the quiet moments, when he was alone with his thoughts, a small voice wondered if he was asking too much of Tori, of himself, of their bond. July 4th, 2016, dawned bright and sweltering in Orlando, the air thick with humidity and the buzz of anticipation. AquaWorld's main arena was a sea of red, white, and blue, with families waving flags, children clutching glow sticks, and vendors hawking overpriced souvenirs. The 4th of July show was the park's crown jewel, a spectacle designed to outshine every other attraction in the city. Backstage, Tom adjusted his wetsuit, his heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and nerves. He glanced at Tori in the holding pool, her massive form circling slowly, her dorsal fin cutting through the water like a blade. She seemed calm, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of unease, a shadow that Tom couldn't quite decipher. He shook it off, chalking it up to the pressure of the day. "We've got this, girl," he whispered, tossing her a fish. Tori snapped it up, but her gaze lingered on him, unreadable. The show began with a burst of energy. Music blared through the speakers, lights flashed in patriotic colors, and the crowd roared as the orcas entered the main tank. Tori led the way, her powerful tail propelling her through the water, followed by two younger orcas, Kale and Luna. Tom took his place on the platform, waving to the audience, his smile wide but his hands trembling slightly. The first few acts went off without a hitch. Tori leaped on cue, her body soaring into the air, sending a wave of water crashing over the front rows. The crowd cheered, their voices a tidal wave of excitement. She performed a series of spins, her tail slapping the water in perfect rhythm with Tom's signals. Kel and Luna followed her lead, their synchronized movements drawing gasps and applause. Tom felt the familiar rush of pride, the thrill of working with these incredible creatures. But as the show progressed, Tom noticed subtle signs that something was off. Tori's movements were slightly slower, her responses to his cues a fraction delayed. During a break between acts, she lingered near the edge of the tank, her head bobbing just above the surface, her eyes fixed on him. "You okay, girl?" he called, leaning down. She exhaled sharply, a misty spray that soaked his wetsuit. He laughed, but the unease in his gut grew. He glanced at the other trainers, stationed around the tank with whistles and poles, ready to intervene if needed. They nodded back, their expressions tense but professional. The show must go on. The moment for the big stunt arrived. The crowd hushed, the music swelling to a dramatic crescendo. Tom climbed the 20-foot platform, his footsteps echoing on the metal steps. Below, Tori circled the tank, her body a dark shadow in the turquoise water. The stunt was the culmination of weeks of preparation. Tom would dive from the platform, timing his jump so that Tori would leap from the water, allowing him to land on her back midair. They'd practiced it dozens of times, and though it was risky, Tom trusted Tori implicitly. He raised his whistle, gave the signal, and the crowd held its breath. Tori surged forward, her tail pumping as she built speed for the leap. Tom took a deep breath, his muscles coiled, and dove. The plan was perfect in theory. Tori would leap, her body arcing gracefully, and Tom would land on her back, riding her down in a triumphant splash that would bring the house down. But as he plummeted toward the water, something went horribly wrong. Tori's leap was off. Too early, too low. Her timing, usually flawless, faltered, and Tom missed her back entirely. He hit the water hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. The crowd gasped, some thinking it was part of the act, others sensing something was amiss. Tom surfaced, dazed but uninjured, and swam toward the edge of the tank, expecting Tori to circle back for the next cue. Instead, she turned sharply, her massive body cutting through the water like a torpedo. Her eyes locked onto him, and for the first time in their years together, Tom felt a primal jolt of fear. There was no warmth in her gaze, no playful spark, only something cold and unyielding. Before he could react, Tori's jaws closed around his leg. The crowd's cheers turned to screams, a cacophony of panic that echoed through the arena. Her teeth, designed to crush bone, sank into his flesh, and pain seared through him, white-hot and all-consuming. Tom fought, thrashing against her grip, but Tori's strength was overwhelming. She dragged him under, her powerful body twisting as she shook him like a rag doll. The water churned into a froth, bubbles and blood clouding the tank. Trainers on the sidelines sprang into action, blowing whistles and banging metal poles against the water, desperate to distract her. The crowd was in chaos, parents shielding their children's eyes, others filming with trembling hands. Tom's mind raced, his training kicking in, even as panic threatened to overtake him. He tried to push against Tori's snout, to signal for release, but she was in a frenzy, her movements wild and unstoppable. The attack lasted less than a minute, but to those watching, it felt like an eternity. Sarah, a junior trainer and one of Tom's closest colleagues, dove into the tank, her heart pounding as she swam toward Tori. It was a reckless move, one that could have cost her life, but she couldn't stand by as Tom was torn apart. She slapped the water, shouting Tori's name, trying to draw her attention. For a moment it worked. Tori released Tom, turning towards Sarah with a terrifying speed. Sarah barely scrambled out of the tank, her hands slipping on the wet platform as trainers pulled her to safety. Lifeguards and trainers rushed to Tom, dragging his limp body from the water. His wetsuit was torn, his leg a mangled mess of blood and bone. Paramedics were already on the scene, their faces grim as they worked to stabilize him. The crowd was evacuated, their screams fading into a stunned silence as security ushered them out. Tom was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was catastrophic. His leg was shattered, his body riddled with internal injuries from the force of Tori's attack. Despite the paramedics' efforts, Tom Elliot, the 27-year-old trainer who'd poured his heart into his work, died en route to the hospital, his life snuffed out in the prime of his youth. The arena fell silent, the once vibrant tank now a grim reminder of the tragedy. Tori was herded into an isolation tank, her massive form barely visible through the murky water. Aqua World went into lockdown. The show canceled. The park closed for the day. News of the attack spread like wildfire, dominating headlines and sparking a firestorm of debate. For those who knew Tom, the loss was a wound that cut deeper than any words could express. The tragedy was no longer just a story, it was a reckoning. The days following the attack were a blur of grief, anger, and chaos. Aqua World became a lightning rod for criticism, with animal rights groups descending on Orlando in droves. Protesters lined the streets outside the park, their signs bearing Tom's smiling face alongside slogans like "Free Tori" and "End Captivity Now." Social media exploded with hashtags, videos of the attacks circulating despite Aqua World's attempts to suppress them. News outlets replayed grainy footage, analyzing every moment of the tragedy, while pundits debated the ethics of keeping orcas in captivity. For many, Tom's death was not just a tragedy, but a symbol of a broken system, a stark reminder of the risks of forcing wild creatures into human-designed roles. Emily, Tom's wife, was shattered. She'd been in the veterinary lab when the attack happened, reviewing Tori's latest health reports. When the call came over the radio, her world collapsed. She rushed to the arena, arriving just as Tom was loaded into the ambulance. She'd held his hand, her tears mixing with the blood on his wetsuit, begging him to hold on. But he was already slipping away, his eyes unfocused, his breath shallow. In the days that followed, Emily became a ghost of herself, haunted by the memory of Tom's confidence, his unwavering belief in Tori. "I told him it was dangerous," she'd whisper to herself, replaying their late-night conversations. She'd warned him about the stress captivity placed on orcas, the unpredictable behavior that could surface without warning. But Tom's love for Tori had blinded him, and now he was gone. Emily resigned from Aqua World within a week, unable to bear the sight of the tanks or the sound of the orcas' calls. She moved back to Maine, seeking solace in the familiar shores of her childhood. But the pain followed her. She began speaking out, channeling her grief into advocacy. She joined animal rights groups, sharing Tom's story at rallies and conferences, her voice trembling but resolute. "Tom loved Tori," she'd say, "but love isn't enough when you're asking a wild animal to live a life it wasn't meant for." Her words resonated, drawing attention to the plight of captive orcas and fueling a growing movement to end their captivity. Tori's fate was uncertain. After the attack, she was moved to an isolation tank, a small concrete enclosure that offered little comfort. Experts were brought in to assess her behavior, their findings a mix of science and speculation. Some argued that Tori had snapped under the stress of captivity. Her small tank, unnatural diet, and relentless performance schedule had eroded her mental and physical health. Others believed the attack was a tragic miscommunication, a moment of confusion during the high-stakes stunt. Tori's history offered few clues. She'd had minor incidents before, refusing cues, snapping at fish, but nothing on this scale. The truth remained elusive, locked in the mind of an animal who could not speak for herself. Aqua World's management scrambled to contain the fallout. They issued press releases expressing deep sorrow for Tom's death and promised a thorough investigation. But the public was unforgiving. Attendance plummeted, families canceling their vacations, sponsors pulling their funding. The park's reputation, already battered by years of controversy, was in ruins. Within months, Aqua World announced it would phase out its Orca program, a decision hailed by activists but met with mixed emotions by the trainers. For many, the orcas were more than animals. They were colleagues, friends, family. Letting them go felt like losing a part of themselves. The investigation into the attack revealed troubling details. Tori's health records showed signs of chronic stress, elevated cortisol levels, dental damage from chewing on tank walls, and a weakened immune system. The high dive stunt, approved by management despite concerns from some trainers, had pushed Tori beyond her limits. The tank's size, barely 100 feet long compared to the miles she'd swim daily in the wild, had likely exacerbated her frustration. The report stopped short of blaming Tori, instead pointing to systemic issues, inadequate training protocols, insufficient tank space, and a culture that prioritized profit over animal welfare. By 2017, Aqua World was a shadow of its former self. The Orca shows were replaced with smaller exhibits, focusing on dolphins and sea lions, but the park never recovered its former glory. In 2018, it closed its doors for good, its tanks drained, its gates locked. The closure was a victory for activists, but a bittersweet one for the trainers who dedicated their lives to the animals. Many, like Sarah, left the industry entirely, haunted by the memory of Tom's death. Tori was moved to a sea pen off the coast of Georgia, part of an experimental rehabilitation program aimed at preparing captive orcas for potential release. The pen was larger than her tank at Aqua World, with natural seawater and a view of the open ocean, but it was still a far cry from the wild. Experts worked tirelessly to improve her health, introducing live fish and reducing her stress. But Tori struggled to adapt. Her years in captivity had left her dependent on humans, her instincts dulled by routine. She died in 2018, just 2 years after the attack, her body weakened by chronic infections. Her death was mourned by those who'd known her, a final chapter in a story that had begun with hope and ended in tragedy. Emily's advocacy grew stronger in the wake of Tori's death. She partnered with organizations pushing for legislation to ban orca captivity. Her speech is a blend of science and raw emotion. By 2018, Florida had passed stricter regulations on marine parks, limiting the use of large marine mammals in entertainment. Other states followed, and the global conversation about captivity shifted. Documentaries inspired by Tom's story and others like it reached millions, shining a light on the cost of keeping orcas in tanks. The movement gained momentum, with countries like Canada and France banning cetacean captivity outright. Tom's legacy lived on in unexpected ways. A scholarship was established in his name at his alma mater, supporting students studying marine biology with a focus on conservation. His hometown in Maine dedicated a small memorial on the cliffs where he'd once dreamed of the ocean, a plaque inscribed with his words, "The sea is their home, not ours." For those who knew him, Tom was more than a trainer or a victim. He was a dreamer, a man who believed he could bridge the gap between humans and the wild. His bond with Tori was real, built on years of trust and mutual respect. But it was a bond forged in an unnatural world, one that could not withstand the weight of captivity. The tragedy of Tom, Elliot, and Tori remains a haunting tale, a reminder of the beauty and danger of the creatures we seek to tame. It's a story of love and loss, of ambition and consequence, and of a young man whose passion for the ocean cost him everything. As the sun sets over the Atlantic, the waves carry his memory, a whisper of a dream that burned bright and faded too soon. If this story grips you, subscribe, like, and share this video with friends. We bring you true wildlife stories that demand to be remembered, understood, and learned from. Respect the wild, and we'll see you in the next video.